I've always loved the quote from Dishonored that states that the boldest measures are the safest. Now, this quote is taken from British Admiral Horatio Nelson, but when you think of the sentiment behind this, it really is a call to courageous acts, aiming high regardless of potential negative outcomes, and not just settling for what you know is tried and true and expected. When doing research on Sean Murray and the history of Hello Games, I couldn't help but be continually reminded of this powerful quote, as their journey is one of boldly stepping out of the ordinary, dreaming as high and wide as the galaxy, and in the process, changing the perception of possibilities and landscape of not only indie games, but gaming as a whole. This is the full story of the making of No Man's Sky, part 1 of 2. And in a way, I am testing out this format for splitting videos in half. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and let's get started. Nowadays, the fan base is seemingly growing like wildfire, but that wasn't always the case. The journey of Hello Games is one that starts and continues to this day on one simple idea and concept, that being childlike vision and ambition. Sean Murray was born in Ireland, but he wouldn't stay too long as his family moved to Australia when he was just 2 years old. I won't go into too much detail into his early life, but there are some things to note that are of great importance going forward in the story. He grew up living on a farm, and he spent many of his days assisting his father with some of the outdoor work needed. While out there, they would spend countless days taking long treks in the evenings and would end the day setting up their tent for an overnight campout. While on his back, staring at the stars in the night sky, Sean's mind began wondering the exciting possibilities that lie in the cosmos. His wonder and excitement grew immensely as he got older and got into reading some sci-fi books like Dune, which he can recall getting helplessly lost in. So much so that he would regularly forget to eat while soaking up the pages. Other sci-fi sources in books, games, and movies would leave him in the kind of childlike wonderment that we can all recall in some form growing up. The difference with Sean Murray, as opposed to many others, is that this childlike wonder and amusement never actually faded away in favor of realistic, safe, and monotonous thinking. Sean would actually teach himself a great deal of game programming in addition to some traditional education. As you go through your years in high school, college, and many early jobs, you're likely to have a lot of stress heaped on you from students to teachers and even terrible bosses. And for Sean, anytime he found himself in these kind of situations, he fell back to doing the one thing that has always helped him reduce stress and maintain his sanity. That is putting his head down at a computer and programming games. Now, this tendency of his will play a big factor in the story later on, and we will revisit this, but for now, let's keep that in mind. Late in his college schooling at University College Cork in Ireland, Sean Murray landed his first big gaming position at Criterion Games in 2000, which, till this day, most people know them best for the Burnout racing series. Criterion back then was just getting started building a name for themselves in the industry, but after they built a solid reputation and portfolio, they attracted the attention of gaming giant Electronic Arts. And in 2004, EA would buy Criterion, which naturally changed the work culture there for the team. As I mentioned, Criterion was and still is best known for their action-packed destruction racing franchise, Burnout. However, burnout is exactly the word to use when describing how Sean Murray felt working for EA, and constantly working on churning out more games and sequels that were less and less creative and inspired. Thinking of the joy that he had in the past, working on and fine-tuning games that he was passionate about, he came to the decision to resign from working with EA in 2006. Sean knew that the one thing that he feared most, losing his childlike youth and passion for playing and programming games, was at risk of getting killed off, or at the very least severely depleted, over working extended hours under EA. The nature of working there meant that he would continue to have to work on a multitude of games without one clear focus on a single IP, and without exploring greater possibilities in gaming to push the medium forward. This was not what he longed for. He managed to convince Ryan Doyle, who he was working alongside with at Criterion and EA, to join him in starting something new together and forming a studio. Sean was incredibly serious, focused, and maybe just a little bit vengeful after his experience working for EA. You see, Sean wanted absolutely nothing to do with EA, and he really disliked anything associated with the company, including his own house. That's right, Sean sold his own house, as it was a constant negative reminder that he bought the house by working for EA, which, in his words, was bad karma. The funds from selling his home went directly into funding his goals for the future of starting their studio and eventual first project. Both Sean and Ryan were the initial developers, but they brought on more experience with the help of Gran Duncan and David Ream to found the studio Hello Games in February of 2008, with the main goal of having full control over what they wanted to create and put out into the world. Starting a new studio is an exciting moment for any group of ambitious developers, but there's also huge challenges that face you from the start. Like, what kind of games are you going to make? At the start of Hello Games, Sean got the small group together and asked them all to really think back on their own childhood and use that as a starting point. He said, think back to when you were a kid. What did you want to be? A cowboy, an astronaut, a stuntman, a fireman, a policeman, whatever. Many ideas were thrown around as the four of them took turns sharing their memories, and there was even lots of talk centered around Pixar films, which they wanted to have as a key piece of animated influence. Their conversations provided great direction for their first game, and once Gran Duncan had shared a stuntman figure that he found while digging through a box of old toys, the team had their starting point, and thus Joe Danger was born. With Joe Danger, Hello Games wanted to ensure that they could make an arcade-like stunt game that was easily playable, accessible, and provided hours of gameplay content. The team met frequently to discuss all the crazy ideas they had and how they would implement them in the game. But along all of their passionate ideation came the practical side of actually making all of their ideas work inside of the game. Planning to release on PS3 would have the potential for major sales, but until then, Sean struggled mightily to get the game out before the studio ran out of funds. So close, in fact, that Sean had to sell his own PS3 to keep things going. And in his own words, we were down to the bare essentials. Luckily, however, within only hours of release, Joe Danger had brought them back above water, as it brought them back the money that they had put into the game and then some. And so Joe Danger, their first title, was released for the PS3 in June of 2010, and later to the Xbox 360 and iOS. This was the team's first taste of major success as a small gaming studio, and the large amount of fan feedback and support, especially in the form of winning awards that year, like Best New Studio, really helped them to envision their potential going forward. I mean, when Sean decided to sell his house, I'm pretty sure he wanted to see the fruits of his labor and vision, which did come in the form of their first title. But he and the team did not stop there. The team relocated their office to an old 2-story building in Guildford, England, where they shared their space with a taxi rank. There was nothing fancy about how they had their office set up. In fact, they even borrowed their neighbor's internet all the way up to their development with No Man's Sky. After all the dust had settled and the team brainstormed new ideas, they saw it fitting to try for a sequel to Joe Danger and throw in some concepts and features that didn't make it to the last game, on top of just wanting to expand things further with the extra financial resources they had. The thought process around the development of Joe Danger 2 was pretty simple. We have most of the assets and engine needed to produce a sequel pretty easily, so development shouldn't be much of a problem. Well, this line of thinking became a trap that they and many developers fall into, and they quickly found that the second game presented its own set of technical problems and challenges that would lead to a less than smooth development cycle. But with the success of their first game, they didn't have to worry about their finances dwindling. After the release of Joe Danger 2, and seeing the great reception and success that both titles had, one would think that Sean would also feel a great sense of fulfillment from what he and the team had created over the years. But this was far from the truth, as Sean felt a growing crisis brewing inside of him. Sean actually went through a series of frustrations with himself and the future direction of Hello Games. He felt that the creative spark inside of him, the childlike ambition that got him into gaming and led him to start his own independent studio, was in danger of fading away. The thought of making another sequel, or even something similar to Joe Danger, frustrated him, as he didn't want Hello Games to hit a creative ceiling so early. He didn't want to make another game that failed to be impactful in the industry and inspire gamers and developers. He'd rather shoot for the skies with a brand new IP than to go the safe route that so many developers do. He needed a change for the studio, and it had to start with a new project outside of Joe Danger. The seeds of his next big project started one late night when Sean had to stay in the office long after hours, awaiting a conference call from Microsoft that he wasn't exactly looking forward to, especially since, with the time zone difference in England, they'd have to meet with him at around 3 a.m. his time. Sean was frustrated with himself and the direction that Hello Games was headed towards. Sean explained his feelings and frustration that night. "I was in the studio on my own and I just started programming. I was furious. I kept working until 3 in the morning. Looking back, I think I had the equivalent of a midlife career crisis. What is the point of these games? Like Joe Danger, how impactful is it?" And so while waiting and pondering his frustrating thoughts, he decided to go back to what made him truly happy in times of hardship, dating back to high school and college, and that's programming whatever game idea he had in his mind. He opened up his computer, remembered his love and passion of so many sci-fi shows and movies, as well as books from the 60s and 70s. Things like Dune, watching Tumor, and even 2001's A Space Odyssey. These are works that inspired his young mind to fantasize about traveling through space and landing on an alien planet. He let his inspired mind go free at his desk without restrictions, and after hours and hours, right before his conference call, he made a super early demo of a Voxel-style game that started the player on one planet and enabling them to space travel to other distant planets. He titled it Project Skyscraper. The very next workday in the office, Sean showed David and Grant the project and idea, thinking they may see him as being crazy for wanting to pursue an idea so massive. And to his surprise, they were just as crazy as he was about the idea and fully supported him. And so Sean's 3 words said it all: "We're doing it." Now around this time, the team consisted of about 6 members, but Sean didn't reveal the project to the whole team as not to throw the other members off while they continued to work on content for Joe Danger 2. Instead, he split the team in 2 within their offices. The Project Skyscraper team consisted of 4 members, Grant, David, and Hello Games programmer Inez McKendrick, and they would work on it 3 days out of the week. Their back room wasn't visible to anyone from the outside. And they even had a secret entrance in the early months as they carved out the scope of the game. Both Gran Duncan and David Ream conjured up ideas, mostly based off of Joe Danger, but with a space twist. They titled the concept Space Cadets. This definitely didn't sit right with Sean, as they were still playing in a very safe space. Sean pushed them to think past these conventional ideas and look far more outside of the realm of what has been done before, or what it was even possible. Thinking back on the original sci-fi works that Sean and the other secret team members had grown up loving, they were able to really hammer down new ideas that were far off in terms of what they've tried or have even seen before. And I'm sure that the atmosphere of their meetings was one of freedom and creative thought, without worrying about how things were going to come together technically. One game that came into play in their inspired ideation was a classic PC title called Elite. On the surface, it may look like some first-person 3D asteroids game, but in reality, it was actually a very early space travel game featuring procedurally generated star system. With so many inspiring sources, it was hard for the team to not throw out a bazillion what-if scenarios regarding the new title. What if the player could craft their own ship? What if the player could enter and exit their own ship? What if the player could enter the ship on one planet and exit on another? And what if every planet had its own unique species and landscape? Each idea increased not only their excitement, but infinitely increased the scope of the game. With the scope of the game obviously outgrowing the skill set of the team, there was one important direction that the secret team decided on very early, and that is the use of procedural generation, as it wouldn't be possible otherwise to handcraft every planet and environment in the game. Sean knew of the possible dangers to using procedurally generated environments, and they are plentiful. This method can lead to environments that make no sense, leading to players getting trapped or having some cheap deaths. Not to mention that it could mean that there is a lack of variety overall in the game. With this knowledge, Sean saw fit to use a variety of complex algorithms that he's experienced and observed to blend them together, creating a completely unique experience that gamers would love to explore. With the use of their algorithmic systems, the tiny team was able to create an almost endless universe that would eventually grow to include over 18 quintillion unique planets. Whew. All with their own terrain, wildlife, and even weather effects. Perhaps an equally great feat is that the size of this universe all came from only 1,400 lines of code. Now you may wonder, like I have for so many years, how in the world can even one planet be rendered on any kind of hardware? Well, the way they worked around this was to render only the environment that the player can observe on their screen, with the rest kind of fading away when not looking in that particular direction. At first though, things didn't quite go as planned with the formulas created for the terrains. Water was an especially tricky element, as they found during testing that it would be in some pretty inconsistent and unrealistic areas, and sometimes even floating in the air. Back at the office, their days started with meetings at 10 a.m. to check on progress, delegate, set goals, etc. Each workday, the team of 4 did lots of research on various species of animals and creatures to take inspiration from for their creature archetype to be used in the game by browsing through Pinterest. They strained themselves and toiled tirelessly on so many additional details, large and small, from the weather effects and timing to the way the ship feels taking off and landing, and even the ambient sounds in the environment. Sean himself went far out of his way to get new ideas, like going to see the film Interstellar, which provided great new ideas for desolate, snowy environments. He even developed formulas that would create similar environments. He came up with these the very next day. The team environment was one that fostered creativity and exploration. There was no whip cracking or deadline-focused conversations going on constantly. In fact, it was pretty common to find designers and programmers getting lost on the internet, finding inspiration, or just wandering in their own creative thoughts. Keeping the whole skyscraper project under wraps from the rest of the team was not an easy task. However, they did provide some hints as to the theme of the next game in a pretty unique way. You see, on the outside of their secret meeting room were torn out book covers for science fiction works from authors like Isaac Asimov and Arthur Clarke, almost begging the outside team to try to decipher what the next project was. The secret team worked in secrecy for almost a year straight before sharing their work. Heading towards the end of 2013, Hello Games was on the verge of breaking their silence and revealing the game slowly to individuals in the gaming industry. Sean Murray, having strong connections over at Sony, decided to email the then Director of Strategic Content at PlayStation, Shahid Ahmad, with an attached early trailer for the game now titled No Man's Sky. He was actually the first person outside of Hello Games to see a sampling of the game, and to say that he was surprised would be a huge understatement. He says, "The hairs on the back of my neck rose. As soon as I'd taken a breath, I wrote back to Murray and told him that we had to have No Man's Sky on PS4. Sean would also be in communication with gaming journalist and host Jeff Keighley, who personally invited him to reveal the trailer and project at the VGX Awards in December that year. Murray agreed and immediately reached out to one of his favorite bands, 65 Days of Static, so they could have their permission to use one of their songs, which he thought would be fitting for what he had in mind for the trailer. Turns out, after hearing more about No Man's Sky, Joe Shrewsbury, a member of the band, took it a step further in his excitement and agreed for the band to compose the game's official soundtrack. The VGX Awards would be jam-packed with spectacular games on the horizon. Games like Destiny, Tomb Raider, and Titanfall were amongst the juggernauts that were expected to not only take center stage, but steal the show in its entirety, but perhaps to the expectation of no one. After showing and talking about their massive new indie title, both Hello Games and No Man's Sky lit the internet gaming world on fire basically overnight. And in part 2 of this story, we'll learn not only what challenges they face with things like the gaming media, but also the darkest side of the internet and how they bravely navigated through to continually craft perhaps the largest game ever created.